these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
All right, we're back, folks. Got a great guest today, somebody I'm a big fan of, an author, Greg Lukianoff. Greg, thanks for being on.
Yeah, nice to finally meet you.
Yeah, and as I was saying before, like I referenced your what year was that book out?
Coddling the American Mind, 2018.
2018. I referenced that quite a bit in my book, because my book was a lot about outrage culture, cancel culture. I called it outrage culture, and I want to get into some stuff with you about, like, what is cancel culture, what is outrage culture, what is a First Amendment right, like what does it really allow you to do? You're a First Amendment lawyer.
Yep.
You run a nonprofit called Fire
Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. We're 25 years old today, or this year, but we used to be the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, but we decided to expand our remit beyond campus in 2022.
So I haven't gotten a chance to really dive in. I've gotten a lot of the footnotes of, I haven't dove into your new book called
Canceling of the American
Mind.
I've got a shtick.
But what's the difference? So, like, Coddling of the American Mind was a lot about cancel culture.
Yes.
So, like, what did you do differently in this book? Can we just start there?
Sure. Well, one, I have a very different co-author. I've been blessed by how excellent my co-authors are. For Coddling of the American Mind, it's the brilliant social psychologist Jonathan Haidt.
Yep.
And he's 11 years my senior. But for Canceling of the American Mind, since it is so much a phenomenon that faces Gen Z, more than anybody else, I wrote about it with a now 23-year-old brilliant young woman named Ricky Schlott. And so coddling was much more about the psychological shifts that we were seeing. And it's more
fantastic. It's such a great overview. It helped me a lot when I have these conversations with voters who are so concerned about this, and it helps me say, look, this is, from looking at the data, this is when the phenomenon started, this is sort of what happened, this is what's true and what isn't true about it.
Yeah.
It was great for that. I would highly recommend it.
I'm proud of it. And a lot of what we were saying there was something I'd been thinking about for years, which was just the fact that I feel like we're teaching young people the mental habits of anxious and depressed people. So we shouldn't be surprised that they have record levels of anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
But we also made the argument that some of these bad ways of thinking are going to be a disaster for free speech and academic freedom on campus. And coddling was much more focused on how did we get here.
Yeah.
Canceling
was an analysis,
and Canceling of the American Mind, originally, since I was writing with this Gen Z young woman, I was thinking about, since so many of the mental health, costs are paid by Gen Z young women, that we were thinking about writing something that was much more a direct follow-up to Coddling of the American Mind. But then when we were working together, because she worked at Fire for a little bit, we ended up realizing that there were still people saying that cancel culture was a hoax or wasn't even real.
Yeah.
And we were sitting on mountains of data about this.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, let's just finally. We wanted to do three things. One, explain that it's real. It's not just real, it's happening on a historical scale. Two, trying to get people to change the way they think about it as a way of not just a nasty, mean approach to life, which it is, of course, but a way of winning arguments without actually persuading anybody, or winning arguments without winning arguments. And then we spend about a third of the book talking about potential solutions, not because we think this is an easily solved problem. Actually, we spend that long talking about solutions because we think it's actually very hard to solve, and there's probably not enough collective will, at least before October 7th, there wasn't.
Yeah, and defining it.
Yeah.
Like, what is cancel culture? And I think it kind of threw in a definition in there. It's sort of the act of winning an argument without winning an argument. I think that's a pretty decent, broad definition, because I've always struggled with the definition, and I like to think a little through a few layers of this, and when I have conversations about it, I'm like, it's not. Is it cancel culture if everyone boycotts your store because you have a swastika on it?
Yeah.
Is that cancel culture?
Yeah.
I guess, but also, don't we have a right as citizens not to associate with people we don't want to associate with?
Yeah.
Is it cancel culture to fire someone for their views? If one of my staff has very, very left-wing views, I'm probably going to end up firing them. Mm-hmm. Am I canceling them? I don't know. I mean, And one observation I've had in politics is you can only be canceled by your own side.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
Is that, yeah, you'd agree with that? Because I'm like, because I always find it funny when like it's in the activist community, left mostly on the right, because so right wingers love to try and get canceled.
Yeah.
I always laugh. I'm like, of course you want to get canceled. Like, there's nothing better for my career personally than me being attacked by an MSNBC host. Like that's gold for me.
Yeah.
But don't claim to be a victim about it. Like, it's awesome. It's working. And so I always find it funny when activists are like trying to trigger and to provoke in order to quote unquote be canceled.
Yeah.
They'll go onto campuses. They put a camera in your face. They do some obnoxious stuff to get canceled.
Yeah.
So you can't include that in cancel culture, right? It's got to be more like, hey, I wrote an essay about something that I was assigned to do, and then I got a bad grade because it didn't fit the viewpoints of my professor.
Yeah.
Now that seems to me to be a little bit more like cancel culture.
Well, the way we define cancel culture in the book is the uptick as of 2014 of campaigns to get someone fired, deplatformed, otherwise punished, expelled, for speech that would be protected under the First Amendment. And we explain a little more detail, kind of as an analogy to public employee law, which is a way to take a short definition and put a great deal of nuance into it. Because like even in public employee law, like, if someone finds out someone's like a Nazi, like off on their own time, there's still case law indicating, even a public employee can be fired for something like that.
Yeah.
And the culture of fear that results from those campaigns. And so as we go through it, I do always like to clarify this though. I do think it's possible to say that you think someone was canceled appropriately. That essentially like them losing their job.
Yeah,
was
and you have to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Like it's P. Diddy is being canceled right now.
Yeah.
Like, for good reason.
Well, not by our definition. Because
not by your definition.
It wasn't for speech. And people always bring up Harvey Weinstein, it's like, well, was he canceled appropriately? And it's like, yeah, he's a rapist. Kind of like that's different. He's a criminal. Like what I'm saying is like someone, because as a First Amendment lawyer, I also believe in freedom of association. So a corporation deciding that I'm going to fire someone at my company because they wrote an op-ed, with an opinion I really disagree with.
Right.
And
that's a tricky part, especially for like free speech advocates, because I'm like, well, I understand that you don't agree with that firing, but also I don't necessarily want to live in a world where as a CEO, I can't hire and fire whoever the hell I want.
Oh, totally. No. I agree with that. But I always try to remind people, but what if every company does that? And it kind of started to seem in 2020, we were getting closer to a stage where essentially if you said something that was mildly critical of BLM, you were
done.
You were absolutely going to get fired. So I try to think of it kind of collectively. However, there are people out there who have made new laws in which you're not allowed to fire someone for their opinion to be the law of the land. I'm like, listen, I'm taking this from a cultural standpoint. I think it's unhealthy for a democracy if basically your boss gets to decide what opinions you're allowed to have off camera. But as far as it being the law, I think that would be really foolish.
So like adding political beliefs to discrimination law.
Yeah,
and right now it's race, gender.
They have been added in some states though.
Right, and
we think that's nuts.
Well, yeah, it kind of. and so it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah. Well,
because I personally, I'm not even sure there should be discrimination laws at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I think they had a place at a certain point in time when you have truly systemic discrimination.
Right.
I see no evidence for truly systemic discrimination at the moment. I'm not sure we need discrimination laws. Now, we're not going to put that back inside the box. So since we're not putting discrimination law back inside the box, even though we've evolved past it, in my opinion, should, and we're talking about immutable characteristics.
Yeah.
And now religion is considered, I guess, an immutable characteristic, but it is a belief system.
Yep.
And so what's the difference between that and a set of political beliefs?
Yeah.
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure where I land on it.
Well, what's funny about it is...
Well, I did actually put a bill in place to regarding social media's ability and their liability under Section 230. So I guess I do have an opinion on it, but it's not an easy one. It's something I think deeply about.
Well, the idea of not being able to fire someone for political belief, there's the ideological kind of point of view that you can have. that when you think of like a group like FIRE, that would mean that essentially we couldn't fire someone if they decided one day to say, hey, I no longer believe in freedom of speech. And that would be a ridiculous outcome. But that's more like the in theory. In reality, a law that basically said that you have a cause of action if you were fired for your political belief, guess what's going to happen next? Every single person in the country is going to claim they were actually fired for their political beliefs. So as a practical matter, it would be
that's a perfect one. What do you think about my comment that maybe we should be cutting back on, maybe we should put discrimination law back in the box anyway? Again, it clearly had a place.
Yeah.
It's not so clear to me it has a place.
I'm sympathetic to anti-discrimination law to a degree, but on campuses I've seen what people don't get is that the speech codes of the 1980s on college campus that have never left us, they were all based on anti-discrimination law. They basically just reconceptualized hate speech, like as being a racial harm.
Right.
And of course, it doesn't take very long before you come up with
it. Just makes everything.
It makes everything becomes hate speech.
Right, especially when you're putting out doctrine. I think it was like one of our Smithsonian documents, I think, that came out. It was like what it is, like whiteness. It's like being on time.
Punctual.
So wait a second. So if I'm telling students that being on time is a good thing, you've now created a foundation to make me racist.
Yes.
That's fucking insane.
Well, and that's what I've seen on campuses for my entire career. It well precedes it. And I mean, like every dumb thing that you could possibly imagine getting in trouble for on campus, I've seen it.
Yeah. You're allowed to swear on this podcast too.
Oh, good,
we can
great.
do whatever we want. I like talking to guys like you because you're both the lawyer and the researcher on it. So I mentioned that I kind of did take a position on this because I had sponsored a bill some time ago when we were looking at Section 230 and social media reform, and that's a tough nut to crack because you got to take a scalpel to that. People are like, remove Section 230, and I'm like, well, you're just ending the internet. That's not quite where you want to go. And so we looked at a number of ways on like how do you make this truly a place where you're not discriminated against.
Yeah.
And that particular bill was more about I guess blocking users of a program based on their political beliefs. And now that is very different than firing someone.
Yeah.
That is a very different thing because I do think social media companies can and should be looked at as sort of public utilities.
Yeah.
I kind of view airlines the same way, especially after my recent incident because they grabbed that dog over there. It's very messed up.
They grab your dog?
Oh, if you haven't seen the video on YouTube, you should watch that video. It'll mess you up.
I'm sorry, you're a good boy.
He's a good boy, but they said he was too big, and my wife was like, "What? He's flown 5,000 times," and they're like,
dog.
"Yeah, this is power tripping." Not only that, they want to take pictures of him, not let him fly ever again.
Yeah.
And so they grabbed at his bag and tags as my wife was trying to leave. She was like, "I'm going to take a different flight. I'm going on Southwest. Screw you. I'm out of here."
Yeah.
And so I complain, and I'm like, "Let me see this video." They treated me like crap. I recorded the conversation. I see the video. I was like, "Wow, it's exactly what my wife said. You're a liar." And they're like, "Get out of here." And I was like, "Well, I'm going to get that video because I'm me."
Yeah.
And I did get that video, and then I posted it.
Yeah.
A couple months later. So anyway, it's a long tangent.
I feel like TSA has been more power.
No, not
lately.
TSA. Not TSA.
Oh, not TSA?
United Airlines gate agent.
Oh, really?
Yeah. People, we need a bill of rights, I think, for consumers. But I don't want to get into it. But look it up, Dan Crenshaw United. It's an entertaining video on YouTube. But I think my point was, some industries truly are public utilities in a way, and social media kind of fits that. If we're talking about freedom of association, it's one thing if I'm like, I'm just not going to serve you that sandwich. I don't like you. There's something about your face. I don't like it. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Okay, you can get a new sandwich somewhere else. It's like the cake baking thing.
Yeah.
Like when they were attacking the cake bake shop because they didn't want to do a gay wedding. Get a cake somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. But you can't get another flight.
Yeah.
Because they own that route. And you can't get another social media platform. You need that one. I mean, it's where your business is, et cetera. And so it is different. It's different than firing, right? And so I think I can hold both of those ideas in my head.
I see it. We had very in-depth discussions about this, at FIRE, and tried to sort of parse our way through. And we were definitely the idea that social media companies act like a public utility was something that we had some sympathy for. but it immediately started to seem like we had made the right call to oppose limitations on social media companies' rights to not work with someone, to kick someone off the platform because of their opinion. Because by the time we actually had parsed through it and we were issuing our statements on it, that's when Elon Musk had bought X. Everybody was moving to Threads, which actually some people really have moved to. I'm on Substack, for example. There are a lot of social media alternatives that came up in the wake of X being bought by Elon Musk. So we definitely came down on the right of social media companies to decide who they work with. We have also come out and said, if someone were to come out and simply say that everyone who gets kicked off social media has a right to be told, why, and that they were, and have a right to appeal, that's something I'm more.
Yeah, a transparent. Well, yeah, that would be a good compromise at least.
Yeah.
Because I tell my fellow members here, like, nobody's been on social media longer than I have. There's nobody in Congress because.
I'm so sorry.
Well, just because of the school I went to, we were one of the first schools to have it. I was one of the first on Facebook, so I'm pretty sure I've been on it the longest. That's just Facebook. I wasn't on Twitter and Instagram and all that until I actually got into politics. But still, I think I understand it pretty well, and you got to be careful.
Yeah,
you got to be careful. Now, has it done a net disservice to humanity? Probably. I think it's making us a little crazy
in a lot of ways. Yeah, I talk about it. Like my one of my academic backgrounds is studying the printing press and about how like Henry VIII and Elizabeth I of England tried to put the genie back in the bottle by hyper-regulating the printing press. Of course, it didn't work. There was no way to put the genie back in the bottle. But a lot of times when people talk about moral panics around social media, they'll be kind of like, oh, people thought the same thing about the printing press, that it was some kind of disruptive technology.
Yeah.
It's like, you mean the technology that meant an increase in the witch trials because one of the original bestsellers was about how to spot a witch, and that led to like bloody wars in Europe for about 2 centuries? Like, it was incredibly disruptive. It was it ushered in a crazy and bloody period. Yeah. Was it worth it in the long run? Sure.
Yeah.
But I say this sometimes to heighten other people who really want to regulate our way out of the social media problem. I'm not sure we really can. I think
no, you can't. It's not even worth talking about.
Yeah, well, no, I think it's worth talking about because I think to a degree, partially because you could get to points like we have to culturally adapt to it. There are things that we can do that I think shouldn't be objected to by pretty much anybody. Like John's idea of having phone-free schools. Like basically, you check your cell phone in the beginning of the day, you get it back at the end of the day. I got no problem with that whatsoever.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I'm not even sure I'm opposed to Florida's law of just banning it for, 14 and under?
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking of my daughter. I have an 8-month-old daughter now.
Oh, mazel tov.
Yeah, that's great.
I got a 6 and an 8-year-old.
But then you're right at that point where you're really thinking about this, because I mean, she already likes the phone because she sees her parents on it, and it interacts with her, so she doesn't know what it is, but
they
pretty obvious how quick they like it, and I'm like, I don't want you on social. There's zero benefit to you being on social media until I've had the chance to impart on you the many lessons that I've learned. Like, let me raise you first, and so banning kids from social media, and you have to do it by law because as a parent, okay, people say, well, the parents should do it. Okay, so I'm going to isolate my kid and make it worse on them. And by the way, if all their friends are on it, they're going to find a way to be on it. Yeah. Let's not be stupid here.
Yeah, my only objection to some of these ideas, and it's a source of disagreement with me and Haidt, who I love very much, and I wrote a whole thing on Substack about I agree here, I agree.
What do you guys disagree on?
It's that laws like that would require some kind of verification, and depending on what the verification regime looks like, it's something that a civil libertarian has to sound the alarm on, because in order to keep social media for kids ever from signing up, there's some ways to do it that actually would just empower parents to like one of John's ideas is have a cell phone that you buy that you can put I'm buying this for my kid. They have to be checked if they're going to any of these websites. That's something I think is very well within the rights of parents. But if you're saying that it's just an age, like an age prohibition, then that means pretty much every social media company has to then start getting some form of verification for you, period. Yeah. And I don't trust our government, I don't trust, and I certainly don't trust anyone else's government enough to be comfortable with allowing that too lightly. So the verification.
But they could do it now. What would government have to do with that?
What would government have to do?
Yeah, what would government's role be in the age verification? We would, like, if we wrote that law, we would say that you have to put an age verification in there. We wouldn't prescribe how to do it.
Oh no, but ultimately, kind of like, so like Louisiana had a version that actually required you to like show an ID, and essentially like protecting anonymity on the internet is important. And I talk about it like a seesaw.
Is it important for social media though?
I think it is.
Like, is it important that that we can have like 25 anonymous accounts to go talk shit to people? Like, is that so important?
Well,
shouldn't we own who we are if we're talking about free speech and freedom of association? You know, I mean that's a.
But this is the seesaw I'm talking about. The easier it is, like basically, if we lived in a society where everybody believed truly that you're entitled to your opinion, then I think the justification for anonymity would not be that strong. We do not live in that society. And particularly a lot of what we point out in Canceling of the American Mind is people just losing their jobs for BS reasons in the face, because they weren't able to hide their identity. And then when you actually factor in other countries, you think about like Erdogan in Turkey or Putin in Russia or Xi for that matter. Like I think there's I think particularly given social intolerance and particularly political intolerance, there's a good argument for protecting.
I don't know, but does it really infringe civil liberties? Because in the end, it's up to you. You don't want to give your ID, don't give your ID. You won't have an account.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. So it's like I don't see a civil liberties infringement there. I see a less people maybe going online and creating fake accounts. That's for sure what I see. And I see more people who are like, oh, I don't care. Yeah, know who I am.
Yeah.
There needs to be some privacy law around that on how that data can be used and how to, maybe that would be what we require in a bill like that. I'd have to read Florida's. I'm not sure how they implemented it.
Yeah.
But I'm curious and to look more into it. I just look at it from, and I was on the opposite side of this before when we were debating 230 and the social media companies were up here, and even a lot of colleagues on both sides of the aisle were like, it's about the kids, and I'm like, well, hold on a second. Like, how I can't expect them to change every kid's algorithm to make them not crazy. Teenage angst is not a new thing. I grew up in the 90s. It's full of teenage angst movies. Yeah. Yeah, it's all teenage. Well, I'm not Gen X. I'm an elder millennial.
Oh, you're elder millennial.
So I grew up in analog, but ended up in digital. I'm that generation. Like I had a Nokia in high school, and Facebook in my junior year. Like it was, so I have a pretty decent understanding of both worlds. And what was my point? Oh, teenage angst. Like teenage angst has always existed. Like social media makes it worse.
Yeah.
But I've actually evolved on that. Like I don't think I realized how bad it was.
Yeah.
I think the data shows that it's literally killing kids.
Yeah.
And so I don't want and now I have a daughter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I can't risk her being cyberbullied and me not knowing about it and something bad happening. And it's one thing to be like, okay, I can buy a phone that she gets, and but now I've just isolated her.
Yeah.
And her friends at school are like, they're talking about something that's trending, and she's left out.
Yeah.
Like, so you can't do that either.
Yeah.
It becomes a difficult proposition.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons why I'm so pro the no phones in schools approach, because basically
that helps. That kind of is a good compromise.
Yeah, and that essentially, like, when it comes to these kind of fixes, as a civil liberties lawyer, it's always, just like they say with like drugs, like pharmaceuticals, start low and go slow.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that approach in policymaking generally.
Yeah.
So okay, we can agree on that. I think that's a good first step. Is there schools doing that?
Yeah, actually,
is there a state that does that? No, I don't think so.
I don't know if a whole state does it, but it's common. I mean, because anxious generations really
we can't do it from our level.
It is really making some big waves. Usually schools are local control.
Yeah, we don't want to open Pandora's box. We're asked to a lot, but it's like, fix our schools. I'm like, well, keep in mind, the shoe goes on the other foot sometimes. You need to be careful what you ask of me. So, can we talk just First Amendment? I think this is a super interesting conversation that you're very well qualified to have. And just because I don't think we talk about this enough in terms of just the basics. Like, what is free speech? Give us a little overview of like when free speech actually even became a protected thing.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it was part of the Bill of Rights.
Yeah.
But I'm just like a little fuzzy on our history. Free speech was not protected for like a good, well over a century, about 150 years.
Yeah.
So, you know, you had the Woodrow Wilson era. Ain't a lot of free speech protected there. We had slavery. No free speech there.
Not
no
very
freedom
free
of
speech
association. No freedom of really anything. So you can't exactly claim that we were honoring our founders' intent, and our founders were geniuses, and I always like defend our country because, look, just because the founders created an amazing thing, but in a time when humanity wasn't ready for it. But if they hadn't created it, we never would have evolved into it, and that's really fucking exceptional. But give us some history on like when Free Speech Act and Supreme Court decisions actually started protecting free speech.
I'm like, okay, I was going back to the printing press.
It was in your book, so I kind of, right? I'm not too far off.
I get excited about this stuff. So my blog is called The Eternally Radical Idea because and that's my reference to freedom of speech, because I always make the point that in every generation, people rise up to demand censorship, and historically speaking, they're generally on the winning side. So free speech is comparatively rare value, and it's something that it shouldn't be that much of a surprise. You didn't hear too much about it before the printing press, because as a practical matter, except in ancient Athens and ancient Greece, where they did have small-scale democracy, when it wasn't actually practical to reach a lot of people, then there's not a lot of discussion of free speech. But almost as soon as there was the possibility of reaching lots of people, you started a discussion of what free speech is, who should, like, how far should it go, and of course, when people started thinking about democratic self-government, you can't really have democracy without at least some protection of freedom of speech. But surprisingly, so the First Amendment passed in 1791.
How did they view it? Like, what were their conversations about what they meant by a right to free speech?
Yeah, that's always an interesting discussion, because, and that's one of the reasons why a lot of constitutional lawyers bristle a little bit at the idea of original intent, because it should always be pluralized. There are original intents. A lot of people,
that's true.
They left thinking that
there was debate.
Yeah, exactly. So, but freedom of opinion, essentially, like the idea that your opinion should not land you in jail is the purest form of freedom of speech. And by the way, the freedom of the press that's in the First Amendment.
Yeah.
So there's basically 6 freedoms protected under the First Amendment. People usually lump religion together, but I don't think they should. So it's freedom of speech, freedom of the press, by which they meant the printing press. Mm-hmm. They meant the machine, not
you can make a newspaper. You can write whatever you want.
Yep.
Right? As long as it doesn't say, everyone go kill this person.
Yeah. And freedom of assembly, which actually has been interpreted to also mean freedom of association, the right to petition the government for redress of grievances, probably the most obscure part of it. But then, of course, the 2 religion clauses, which a lot of times people, when they lump together, they're missing the brilliance of the founders, because it was both, you have a right to practice your religion, free exercise, but also the government cannot mandate what the state religion must be. Absolutely brilliant combination. But even though it passed in 1791, it didn't mean much of anything, legally speaking, until about 1925. Now, that doesn't mean there was no free speech in the country. There's a great book called The People's Darling Privilege by Michael Kent Curtis that talks about how, actually it was in the context of slavery, that even though abolition was not very popular in early 19th century, it was when a radical abolitionist priest was killed defending his printing press, and I think called actually the original Reverend Lovejoy in 1838, 1837. That was a moment when the public started to go, wait a second.
Wait a second, we have an amendment that says you can't do that.
Well, but also it got defended as a public value. Not just, even though the law was not strong, there was a big backlash against this, because mobs shouldn't be killing people for their opinions. But it took all the way through, Woodrow Wilson actually helped out things a little bit by passing such awful laws and enforcing them against.
I don't think people realize the Wilson history.
Oh yeah.
It's not.
Well, my dad grew up in Yugoslavia. We all know the mistakes that Wilson made. We grew up.
Well, he has a generally kind of positive. I just think, I don't know, historical memory. I don't know what the right
that's changed a lot. Like I remember,
it's changed in academic circles who know better. I'm not sure it's changed in the general public.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not like I've done a poll.
Yeah, no, I think
if I did a poll, people would be like, "Who's Woodrow Wilson?" So, what am I even talking about? Who's the president?
Is he a football player?
Tom Brady? I don't know. Like, fuck.
So it was really only about 1925 it started having real legal meaning. And it increased a lot, diminished a little bit around World War II.
What's in 1925? So this is Coolidge era.
Yeah, this was a case called Gitlow,
Okay.
where essentially what happened there was that the Supreme Court recognized that the First Amendment was incorporated against the states through the Due Process Clause, because prior to that, there's a reasonable argument on this one. Prior to that, the First Amendment was read as only applying to the federal government. Mm-hmm. But then when you pass the 14th Amendment, and a lot of the post-Civil War ones, I'm very much in the camp who believe that was an attempt to actually incorporate the entire Bill of Rights to the whole rest of the country, including
Interesting. Okay, so this is the general idea. I didn't quite realize that. So
Yeah.
it was long interpreted that this was only applied to the federal government.
Yeah. Even though it didn't have all that much
local
meaning.
and state governments didn't actually have to give a damn what the Bill of Rights said. Because that's not what our founders' intent was. It was meant to encompass everybody, I thought.
That was debated. There were founders who thought that it was supposed to create the one right or the 10 rights that everybody had.
Sure.
And then
Who's who on that debate?
I'm
going to challenge your history.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to remember. I remember in the prologue of that book. I'd be too much risk of muffing it up.
I'm going to assume that the Federalists,
Yeah.
the Madison and Hamilton and John Jays were on the side of like, no, this applies to everybody, and I'm going to assume maybe the Anti-Federalists were on the other side.
That would make
Is
perfect
that
sense,
Jefferson?
yeah.
But I'm not really sure if Jefferson.
Well,
I'm not sure what he thought later on.
Yeah, Jefferson, of course, is fascinating because, he's an anti-federalist who ruled effectively as a federalist.
Everybody evolves.
By his own standards, he wasn't allowed to buy Louisiana. And it's like, actually turns out it'd be
It's a
really
really good deal, though.
yeah, exactly.
It's a great deal. It's like $20. We should just buy this.
Exactly.
Let's buy Greenland. I mean, fuck. We all made fun of Trump, but it's not the worst idea in the world.
I remember reading that there was an attempt to buy Cuba under the Grant administration, but they wouldn't allocate the money because they thought he was too corrupt. I don't know if that's actually
That would have been
history,
great.
but
That would have been another
but think
great
about
one.
how cool.
Yeah, because we have
that
Puerto
is.
Rico, which is way further than Cuba.
Yeah, Puerto Rico's also tiny. I mean, Cuba is just like nonstop.
I don't know. They never say never. There's still time.
We get a coupon.
History's funny like that. Okay, so these cases occur, and we come to a more modern understanding of what free speech is. And
Which largely happened really in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And that's when you start
that's
getting,
kind of a civil rights era connection there.
That's when you start getting the first cases about academic freedom being protected by the First Amendment, a case called Sweezy from 1956. That's when you get New York Times v. Sullivan. That's one of the ones that reined in defamation laws so that it's, it's harder to prove that you were defamed, for example.
It's extremely hard. I try all the time, but I've had this conversation with my lawyers a lot. But it is reasonable.
Yeah, it is, because when you look at other countries...
I don't like, though, that it applies differently to me than it does to maybe these, I wouldn't say, because you're also kind of a public figure.
Yeah.
But we have very different standards between me and my staff here.
Yeah, no, I actually think that makes a lot of sense because basically, I think if the standard was the other way around, it would be just as hard to prove that that your staff.
Well, shouldn't the standard just be the same?
I think for a truly private figure, there's an idea that you have some amount of a private life, whereas people who
what do you think? Well, I've been meaning to ask you this because I have my opinions on it that have also evolved just based on experience.
Yeah.
Should people really be able to go to the front doorstep of a Supreme Court justice and protest?
Front doorstep if they're on their private property.
Whatever, the sidewalk.
Then no. Sidewalk, generally, yeah.
But let's talk values, though. Let's not talk about the law. I think the law protects it.
I don't like it. And
I don't think the law should protect it. That's where I stand. 'Cause I'm telling everybody right now, if you come to my house and I get it, you're not at my doorstep, because you are at my doorstep, trust me, violence is coming.
Yeah.
But even if you're at the sidewalk, I will perceive you as a threat. And if I perceive you as a threat, well, I think you know what that means.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
You're in trouble, especially in Texas.
Yeah.
And you're in trouble, especially with me. Never come to my house.
Yeah.
I'd say that very publicly. I don't think you should I think I should also be able to call the police, because otherwise, again, I don't know what you have on you.
Yeah.
I perceive you as a threat. You're acting crazy. I don't know what you've got in your pockets.
Yeah.
I have a baby in the house. I've had to put bulletproof film on my windows, mostly because I go after cartels a lot, and I'm kind of worried about that.
Yeah.
But regardless, you have no right. That's not, I don't think our founders thought about that as freedom of speech. You're walking around and somebody's screaming in your face.
Yeah.
That's not freedom of speech. You're infringing on me at that point.
Well, someone's literally screaming in your face. That's arguably even assault. I mean,
right. Well, what about screaming 6 feet away from me? What's the difference?
So,
and we act like this is okay. We've seen politicians get mobbed.
Yeah.
And I'm not touching you. I'm not touch. It's like that game you play with kids. I'm not touching you. I'm not touching you. But bro, if you do that to me, I'm going to touch you.
We're seeing a lot of this play out on the protests that are going on campus about what the parameters are.
It's insane.
And seeing students who don't think that linking arms and progressing towards someone to kick a Zionist, by which they mean just a Jewish kid, out of their encampment, which is on the...
That's assault.
Yeah, that's exactly. And meanwhile, also just linking arms and saying that you can't come through, that's generally preventing someone from
you were infringing on somebody else's rights.
Exactly.
It's a key governing philosophical principle. The government is there, and it's the Declaration of Independence was written in the following ways: of the first time that we're creating a government to protect your rights. Now, protecting your rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, means my job as the government is to protect you from me, protect you, prevent me from hurting you, but also prevent that person from infringing on your rights.
Yes.
And so you don't have a right to free speech if that person is overwhelming you.
Yeah.
And we have to, I think the pendulum has swung a little too far in this direction where it's it's a free country. I can do whatever I want. I can come to your house. I'm I'm not touching you. No, you're infringing on that person's space in a very serious way.
Yeah, and with regards to some of the exceptions and parameters of what's considered to be First Amendment protected speech, one of the things that you analyze is time, place, and manner regulations. And time, place, and manner regulations, for example, of protesting in a residential area, there's almost always going to be laws about what time of day you're allowed to be there, and are you interfering with someone's peace and quiet in their home. So in some cases, you do see protests getting shut down for interfering with regional
and are those usually but that has to be a local and state law enforced thing? Usually, Ted Cruz had this recently.
Yeah.
Ted Cruz obviously triggers people in a very specific kind of way.
Yeah.
And I think everybody kind of knows where he lives, I guess. I don't know what happened, if they removed those protesters or not, but I'm not sure they did. And maybe that's partly on him, where he doesn't want to give them what they want, so he sort of just lets it happen. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's not a federal law that governs that, or is there?
No, that would be more local and state for the most part. But threats aren't protected. There's been so many things going on campus lately where the first thing I always point out whenever people ask me about the protests on campus, because suddenly pro-Palestinian students think there's never been an assault on free speech until their encampments are getting shut down. And it's where do you begin? Okay, first of all, the situation for free speech has been a disaster on campus for a long time.
Yeah.
Last year was the worst year for deplatforming we've ever seen. This year is going to blow it out of the water. You don't have a right to set up a camp.
No, that's not free speech.
Yeah, that's civil disobedience.
You've created infrastructure
on
private property.
Right. And the fact that you even have to explain taking over the president's office.
And you littered. Littered is illegal. Littering is illegal.
Yeah.
Don't mess with Texas. Where do you think Don't Mess with Texas came from? It's a littering campaign.
Reading Nellie Bowles about some of the encampments and about how much literal human shit they had to remove from one of the places in LA.
It's gross.
It's super gross.
It's shameful. I mean, we had one of the National Review journalists come on and talk to us about his visit to Colombia and just kind of.
Which one?
Zach Kessel. Yeah. Did some great work out there. Good insights onto who are these people?
Yeah.
Where do they come from? And it was interesting. It's and he talked about it in terms of cores of students. There's your true activists. They actually know the history. I mean, they've got their own warped narratives about the history of Israel and Palestine, but they know it, right?
Yeah.
They've been passionate about it for a while. That's a very, very small group.
Yeah.
And you've got a group that's we'll be activists for literally anything.
Yeah. Particularly if it lets them be anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and then you've got others who are just like, I want to do the right thing, and then, and that's a broader group, and they just have no idea what they're even there for.
Yeah, and then what's everyone else doing?
Yeah.
So some of those interviews with some of the protesters could be pretty embarrassing because they had no clue.
Oh, it's nuts. Yeah, but necessary, and that's some of the good journalism that gets done. I think.
Yeah.
Is when you ask those tough questions. Not even tough questions. It's like, what is Israel? Like, what is Zionism? What is Zionism? I mean, they would ask that kind of stuff. And they'd be like, it means kill everyone. It's like,
that was Wall Street Journal, actually asking some of these protesters if they, who were chanting from the river to the sea, Palestine should be free, showed them a map.
Yeah. Do you understand?
This is the river.
What
this
that
is the sea,
yeah.
and the overwhelming majority had no clue.
No.
Like, why?
And intifada, they're chanting intifada. It's like, intifada means it's war.
Yeah.
Like, you don't understand. And some people do understand it.
I've heard students actually try to explain this as being like, but it's more of like an eternal struggle, and it's kind of like, no, like that's not the way. But
it's not how it works out in practice. I mean, I lost an eye for this shit. Like, you're dealing with an enemy that really hates you, and they will always hate you.
Yeah.
Like, I remind people, I'm like, we weren't at war on September 10th, and Israel had a ceasefire on October 6th.
Yeah.
Like, these people hate you because they hate you. Osama bin Laden has no reason to hate us from a logical standpoint. We helped his people out, the Mujahideen, against the Soviets in Afghanistan. He should like us for that.
Yeah.
We stopped Saddam Hussein from invading his home country, Saudi Arabia, in the first Gulf War, and yet he still hates us. Why does he hate us? Because it's born and bred. It's in their ideology.
But it's also because he's a typical rich kid.
He's just like these damn students.
I point out like how
that's an interesting take. Let's unpack that.
Yeah, well, it's one of these.
It's true.
My family's Russian, so Tsar Alexander II was assassinated by the activists, people who called themselves anarchists, but they were sort of proto-communists, because he was liberalizing, because he was going to set up a Duma in Russia, and they bombed him to kill him because this was the argument. He freed the serfs, that was bad enough. He was going to set up a Duma, and that would make the people too happy to want the glorious communist revolution.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, that's pretty warped.
Yeah.
And people forget that Trotsky was one of the richest people in Russia.
Yeah.
Lenin was from a wealthy family. Like, how often it's like the first generation of educated rich kids who actually oftentimes become the weather underground. The really scary
that's
people.
true too.
And people don't know. Like Osama bin Laden was a super freaking rich kid.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people know that, but it's worth saying it a few times. I mean, he's a very, very wealthy family.
Not to say all rich kids end up that way, but it is interesting how often,
interestingly, a pattern. And this is the case too. Over 20 years fighting the global war on terror, we examine who becomes a jihadist, who becomes a suicide bomber.
They think it's
everyone thinks it's poor kids.
Nope,
it's not.
Never.
It's almost never.
Almost never, yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of wild. It's just not what you think.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways that they get involved in it, but it's the thing. Look, it gets to a deeper thing of people searching for meaning. And if you're in poverty,
absolutely,
what are you searching for? If you're in poverty,
yeah,
you're searching for food and water and shelter.
Yep.
That's like your Maslow's hierarchy there. You're not searching for some jihad because you're like, I need water today.
Yeah.
That's what I need. So I'm going to work on that. I don't have time to read the Quran and be a radical. I need water.
Yeah.
If you're rich, you already have all those things and you're seeking purpose. And I think that's the story of this crazy radical activism on campuses. It's like, we are living in a modern era that is so damn comfortable. I mean, oh my God, it's comfortable.
Oh, that was actually in Freedom from Speech, my 2014 very short book. I call it Problems of Comfort. That essentially, there's so many wonderful things about being alive in 2024, and those very same comforts are the things that are going to increasingly make people hostile to free speech, because free speech done correctly involves discomfort.
That's true. It does, by definition, and. Well, I mean, not only that, but again, I think it's a search for meaning. People want to be a warrior.
Oh yeah, yeah.
They want to fight, and some of us channel that a certain way. I channeled it into the SEAL teams.
Yeah.
But not everybody has that opportunity.
Yeah.
So they could go to the military, but they don't. So
They couldn't all be SEALs.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a little hard. It's a little extreme. I went very extreme on that.
My sister was a Navy nurse in
I meant literal fighting, like the real kind of fighting, not like boxing, like really. But anyway, that's one way to do it. You can join you can be like my guys here who work on policy issues. That's their way of fighting.
Yeah.
Like to be heard, to have meaning, and you have to find that. Everybody has to find that.
Yeah.
And it becomes increasingly difficult in this, I guess, in this world. And then and I think people look for the easy way out. Like, what's the easy thing that I can do to find meaning and to feel like I'm fighting? And so when I talked about the core of students who you see there, those outside core, they're just like, I just kind of want to be part of something. I don't know. I didn't think too hard about it. And that's dangerous because I'm like, look, people are like, I have a right to an opinion. Or more importantly, you have to hear my opinion. And I'm like, no, I really don't. Because if your opinion isn't based on facts and logic and some kind of basic understanding or experiential frameworks, then I don't give a damn about your opinion, and I don't have to listen to it. Yeah. And this idea that I have to is very, very strange to me. I heard an interview recently, and it was I've been meaning to listen to the whole thing because it's pretty wild. But Joe Rogan had Terrence Williams on.
Oh, was that the whole periodic table thing?
Yeah. It was good.
Sounded a little goofy.
But there was
talking about the harmonics of it or something?
I'm like, color me so surprised that like some Hollywood actor thinks he has discovered the grand unifying theory of physics and like nobody else knows about it, but he found it in his dreams. Like, wow, weird. Like, sense of aggrandizement from a Hollywood actor. Never would have fucking guessed. Interesting conversation in some just kind of weird, entertaining ways. But one thing that really stuck out to me was he was complaining that Neil deGrasse Tyson had basically ignored him and like, just get out of here. Like, I'm not listening to you. Just shut up. And dismissive. He was very dismissive. And now Neil deGrasse Tyson, I think, can probably be overly dismissive. He's probably got an ego, but he's also like a scientist.
Yeah, crazy smart.
And Joe was like, yeah, why would he do that? Like, why wouldn't he listen to you? And I wanted to like jump in, like, Joe, hey! I wanted to be like, why does he have to listen to him? Like, what? I don't have to listen to every crazy idea. I don't have to take my time to listen to every crazy idea.
Yeah, you were the first roadie and the first Iron Man replaced by Don Cheadle. Like that, to our knowledge, that's
and like that's it. Like, it wasn't.
You've
been watching too much Iron Man, clearly.
I'm a huge Marvel fan.
Yeah, like,
no apologies.
Yeah, I think he would make a really based on that conversation. I'm like, you should be in the science fiction realm, like, because it is interesting. Because that's what science fiction is. It's taking like surface level knowledge and creating a fiction out of it. I enjoy that. Yeah. But like, let's be serious though about the need for experimental data, and I don't know. If you're going to claim 1 × 1 = 2, then like, okay, like do a mathematical proof. Right. That's how you do that. Do it. No, he's not going to do it. So anyway, the point was about opinions and like what opinions matter and
we're also talking about meaning. And one thing that we do a campus free speech ranking at FIRE. And one thing that comes through loud and clear time and time again. By the way, Harvard finished dead last in our ranking last year, and this was before October 7th. They're probably going to do even worse next year. Although actually, I guess you can't do even worse than dead last. But Penn, was right after them in terms of like the 2 worst schools in the country. But schools with like more working class kids and schools with more just regular people, they have much fewer ideological problems. Yeah, and that was the research I got from your books. It was this is an elitist problem, and these pro-Hamas protests were really concentrated in about 50 campuses, from my understanding, and I remind my voters of that too. I'm like, because they think the sky is falling. This is one of the problems with social media and the internet generally is. It sort of makes you omniscient in a way. Yeah. And I'm going to just start taking credit for this quote because I did steal it from someone who said it, but I can't remember. I just saw it on a video on the internet. Mm-hmm. But it was a really deep insight. And this is the last time. After this, I'm going to say I said it. Yeah. You only have to give credit so many times. But he said, only God has the emotional capacity for omniscience. Mm-hmm. You do not. Mm-hmm. I do not. None of us do. Some of us are better, I think, adapted than others, but it's a really problematic thing to be seeing all of the stuff all at the same time
And it is different than the printing press.
Yeah.
You know,
the scale is off.
The scale starts to matter at a
Oh,
certain
absolutely.
point.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it becomes a real discussion about like how far can we let this go?
Yeah.
Because especially for teens, like they think the world is literally burning up around them, and it's like, that's not true.
Well, at the same time, though, coddling the American mind, one of the things we point to is, I just on my Substack, I just did something about the mental health decline, and making the point that we have even more data indicating that the farther to the left you are, the more likely you are to be more anxious and depressed, and that it's pretty, you know, it's pretty much a perfect line. Like,
why do you think that? What's the psychological reason for that? Is it sort of like a shattered world philosophy? Is it like a? What is it?
That's a good question, and it plays into some of the existing research. So generally, like, one thing that is a relatively stable finding in social science is that people to the left do tend to have higher rates of mood disorders and generally be a little sadder about the world, and that makes a little bit of sense. Like, essentially, if you have a very strong kind of crusader-y kind of mentality, then it shouldn't be surprising that you're sometimes dealing with people who might be higher on neuroticism, for example. But one thing that is also really clear from the data is it's gotten much, much worse. That the depression and anxiety rates, you know, of people who are self-described very liberal are just terrible. And my belief,
it's become so normalized.
Yeah.
Is that another reason?
I think it's worse than normalized. I think it's
like normal human experiences become an anxiety disorder, and it's like, no, man, like life is hard. Deal with it. Like, that's my take.
I think to a degree it's also celebrated, and it becomes part of your identity.
It's like part of my truth.
But as someone who grew up, you know, left of center, you know, the left liberalism of the '90s.
That's not the same.
Had a lot more hope about it, and a lot more emphasis on freedom, some amount of emphasis on even, God forbid, fun. You know, like there was definitely.
Right. They definitely used to be the fun crowd. I tell you what, if you want a good party, you come to my parties. Republicans party better than liberals now, because you can't say anything funny in a liberal like party. You can't be funny. You can't. It's just different.
It's killjoys. But I also, one of the observations from the original Coddling the American Mind article, the thing that led me to working with Haidt, was the idea that there were a lot of things called cognitive distortions in the way that the new ideology that was winning around 2014 incorporates. There's a lot of catastrophizing. There's a ton of overgeneralizing. There's a lot of, and this all comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, that basically, like, and I use this on my own depression and anxiety, that essentially, like, anxious and depressed people, actually to a degree, everybody has these like little mental exaggerations.
I do it. I mean, I have 1,000 positive, you know, remarks and the one. But it's like the one, or in my case, the scale for me is much greater than most politicians. But you get what I'm saying. It's
totally.
Like, I think I can count on one hand the number of times people have come up to me in an airport or in person or in a restaurant and said something negative. Now, I attribute some of that to just fear, but it's almost 99.9999% positive, and yet that's not how I feel every day.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know how to overcome that.
Yeah. Well, cognitive behavioral therapy is really helpful, and basically, like, what you do is, when I was treating myself for this stuff, I'm working with a therapist, to be clear. Basically what you do is, when you have like a really negative reaction to something, you write down the thought, and, you know, it's kind of like you go on a bad date, and you say immediately to yourself, "I'm going to die alone." and then you're like, okay, and then you evaluate. It's like, okay, is this rational?
Yeah.
And you have this whole list of cognitive distortions. Like, is this catastrophizing? Is it mind reading? Am I assuming that she hated my guts? Is it fortune telling? It's all of these things that we know are irrational to a degree. And if you could get in the habit,
like if you were giving advice to a friend, you would have a different opinion. And I think maybe that's an important like little game to play psychologically.
That's something.
Like, what advice would you give somebody else?
Yeah,
you'd be like, "No, dude, it's fine."
Yeah, and it helps you gain some amount of detachment. It helps you talk back to these mental exaggerations. But the observation going into the original coddling article was just, it seems like we're teaching young people, and particularly young people on the left, do catastrophize, do overgeneralize, do engage in all or nothing.
Well, it's a victimhood mentality too, which has become popularized, and There is a study, and it was shown to me by a buddy of mine who's a SEAL and then going to be a psychiatrist. And so we came upon this study, and I'm not sure if it was ever published or not. So it probably was, but anyway, it was a VA study, and it was like, and I think they should do more studies like this because it was trying to predetermine who might get PTSD, and
Interesting.
it did look at political beliefs, and it was pretty clear that left-wingers would have a higher propensity for PTSD after the war.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I could have told you that without thinking about it. Now, I'm not so sure that'd be the same now, because there's a populist far right that is very much adapted the left-wing narratives of victimization and catastrophizing, this sort of like shattered world philosophy. And the question to distinguish between the two, I generally like to do, and we would do this if we want to target the right voters. I would ask them a simple question, which is, do you believe the system is rigged against you?
Oh.
Yeah. That is the perfect way to distinguish between like who I think is on my side. Because if you answer no to that question, like no, I'm going to do what I'm going to do. The system is the system.
Yeah.
But I'm me. I own my destiny. All right. Well, then you're my kind of guy.
Yeah.
But if you say yes to that, and by the way, a lot of the left will say yes to that, which I've always expected that. That's not new to me. But we're increasingly seeing that on the right, and that concerns the hell out of me because I hear about the uniparty a lot. Have you heard about the uniparty?
No, I've heard.
Oh, really? You're not deeply involved in politics. But it's like a right-wing label for when Democrats make deals with Republicans and we pass a budget, like the uniparty acts again, and I'm like, okay, well. I'm not sure that's true, but I do see a uniparty with the left and the far left and the far right.
Yeah, it's a horseshoe theory.
It's not a theory.
Oh yeah,
It's like
true.
It's like in practice true at this point. Not on all issues, but on really really big ones.
Well, this happened with the Nazis and the communists, and it's really amusing for someone like me whose family, my grandfather fought the Bolsheviks. And to have like Americans like try to figure out which one's more evil, and hearing people actually say, "Oh, but the communists weren't racist," and I'm like, kind of like, they were.
It's like
and otherwise they believed in violence, they believed in centralization of power, they believed in like all of this kind of stuff. It's like no, they were kind of the same people.
Bad. Don't get me started on some of the foreign policy issues. I want to ask you, going back to your book, because I think you have some interesting labels here. So now we're going back to, let's go back to cancel culture and some, I think, the cognitive phenomenons that you see. So you talk about the left's perfect rhetorical fortress, and you talk about the right's efficient rhetorical fortress. Can you tell us what these are?
So one of the fun things about the book was being able to sort of use it as a critique of the way we argue in the United States today. And so we have one chapter where we call it the minefield and the obstacle course, where we just talk about standards that ways of winning arguments without winning arguments that people use all over the spectrum. And that includes like simple things like name calling. That includes things like just assuming someone's a grifter. Like all of these kind of tactics that you get tired.
We could talk about this for hours because I deal with it constantly. I mean, it's like from both sides. It's like, and it's on the left. It's usually like it's a whack-a-mole.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, okay, we're talking about a border wall and the efficiency of like whether that's a real effective thing or not. And they're like. And then, I'll make an argument, and then the next words out of their mouth are like about abortion, and I'm like, what? I can't like follow you down all of these paths. Like, what? That happens all the time. On the right, it's usually more about, and I think is what you're going to get to about the fortress. Is it's like, well, I just don't believe that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I mean, this is the facts. No, this word means this, and that word means that, and well, I understand you read the bill, but. You might as well be reading French because you don't speak legal language and you don't actually know what the law was prior to that and how this one changes it. I'm just telling you, like, that's not true. And it's like, no, we just don't believe it.
Well, that sounds like you're running into the efficient rhetorical fortress. And we call it the efficient one because there's only 4 levels of it, which is you don't have to listen to experts, you don't have to listen to journalists, you don't have to listen to anybody on the left. So you would be counted.
It's all just untrue.
You would count as an expert. Oh, and by the way, anyone on the left, I said that incorrectly. Anyone that you can claim is. Basically both on the right and the left, people who don't agree with you they're automatically libtards or,
Right. Well, this academic said this. They did a study on this. Yeah, but he's a conservative, so it's not true. Or yeah, but he's a Democrat, so it's not true. I'm like, you've got to assess the information for itself. Like,
exactly.
This is the biggest problem we have in politics, is the inability for people, generally speaking, to analyze information objectively and systematically. It is killing us.
Yeah.
And like I read you that comment I made on social media earlier. I don't know if I read it on camera or not. I think I did, maybe. But I think it resonated because it seems pretty damn obvious that we're just having these fourth grade level discussions. And I'm like, guys, I spend most of my time debunking very, very basic things.
Yeah.
I can't, and I'm trying to have conversations about, I'm trying to make policy about really complicated stuff.
I remember having this argument where it was all sort of like a dumb, like throat clearing kind of thing, and I'm like, okay, we just spent 45 minutes. We haven't even gotten to the actual argument yet, because we're arguing about dumb stuff that is like
it's ancillary. It's all ancillary,
yeah.
And it's like, who's the worst person? That's another like argumentative debate tool. That's like, oh yeah, well, you're supporting a guy who slept with a porn star, and I'm like, you want to play that game? Well, the Biden family's corrupt. Like, like, what are we even talking about?
Yeah,
we're not talking about energy policy, which is what we should be talking about, or the border.
Well, we actually call that in the book the fourth great untruth, because in Coddling the American Mind we talk about three.
The us versus them,
which is like terrible advice. And basically in coddling, it's what doesn't kill you makes you weaker, terrible advice.
It's that victimhood mentality.
Always trust your feelings, terrible advice. Life is a battle between good people and evil people. If that's all you see, then that's terrible advice. And for canceling, we added a fourth, which is no bad person has any good opinion, because like we argue as if I can make an argument that you're a bad person, I don't have to listen to you anymore.
It's a credibility argument.
Just not the way history works, And I always point out like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Absolutely awful human being. The more you know about him, the more you hate this guy's guts. And I disagree with him on the general will and a lot of his opinions. Some of his opinions, though, about how you raise your kids, actually, I think are not too bad. But the fact that someone's a bad person doesn't mean that you get a free pass.
It's like, well, Hitler had a dog, and if you have a dog, then you're a bad person. This kind of association is a little overly simple-minded.
But the perfect rhetorical fortress is the one on the left.
Explain that one.
And that one is largely based on identity. Now, of course, level one is, I call it fascio casting. Like essentially, like if you can, and like casting a spell. And I get this a lot, and so does everybody else, where it's kind of like, oh, you're a right winger, so I don't have to listen to you anymore.
Done.
Yeah, I'm actually not. But like or if they really hate you, you're far right or you're a fascist. And then it's the end of the discussion. And that's just level one.
Ultra MAGA is the newest one. It's kind of funny.
And you can dismiss almost everyone just on level one. And then we go through the entire demographic funnel in the book, and we watch this happen on campus all the time. You can dismiss someone if they're white, you can dismiss someone if they're not gay, you can dismiss someone if they're cisgendered. And by the time you follow this down into the rabbit hole, it actually turns out that you're talking about less than 1% of the entire population of the country. You've dismissed 99%, and it's like, so bravo.
Right, you get to have an opinion on this if you are of this specific gender and you identify as a dolphin on Thursdays.
but here's the thing. If it actually turns out you are a transgender person of color and you have the wrong opinion, then you're even worse. Then
Canceled.
Then you have what is it? Internalized transphobia.
Oh.
You have internalized sexism, which my co-author gets all the time, being told she has internalized sexism. So it's perfect because it's kind of like, wow. So we're only on level 6. We've already dismissed everybody.
This reminds me. I don't know why this reminds me of this random comedian, stand-up comedian I saw just as I was addicted to my reels and just going through them on Instagram, and this thing comes up, and he brings up this really funny point, but I think it's pertinent to this conversation. He's like, "This is how you trick them." It's like, what if you say something like, "Racism is retarded." And just watch them respond. It's like, well, I mean, I agree, but It's like, I love it.
That sounds very Bill Burr.
It was such a good bit. Bill Burr would be a good one to do that, but it was some other guy. I can't remember his name, but it was spot on, right? Like,
Yeah.
it just gets it's just revealing how stupid this stuff is, and unnecessary, but in the end, like, both of these categories, I mean, they're different but similar. It's like basically you're of a category, we don't have to listen to you.
Exactly.
Now the left and the right choose different categories.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's the same phenomenon. It's like we want very simple mental heuristics.
Mm-hmm.
We want decision, and this is a problem in politics too. Everybody wants really simple explanations for the problems.
Yeah.
And if I try to maybe explain that, like, human trafficking is not what the Sound of Freedom said it was. That's not true.
Yeah.
Like, I just did a podcast yesterday with like experts on this, and like, it's just not true.
Yeah.
Like, it's just not how it is. It is a problem, but if we don't talk about the problem correctly, and if you get mad at me because I'm telling you, like, you're part of the establishment. Well, what the hell is the establishment? Is there a headquarters somewhere with this establishment? Wait, what the hell are you talking about? You know, because it just makes no sense. And if you got to examine the problem correctly to provide the proper solution. Mm-hmm. And if we're not analytically approaching that correctly, man, we're screwed.
Well, and this is one of the points, one of the subtler but most important points about cancel culture, is that it destroys trust and expertise. And to a degree, it should in certain circumstances.
You should be skeptical of it.
Well, you absolutely should be skeptical of expertise. But I always give the example of Carol Hooven at Harvard. She wrote a book called Testosterone. She was like on Fox News promoting her book and explaining, she's an evolutionary biologist, and explaining that, that she believes we should be compassionate towards trans people, we should use their pronouns as they request, but we shouldn't pretend that biological sex isn't real.
Right. You should be polite.
Yeah.
I'm for being polite.
Yeah, someone asked me to call someone.
Yeah, you want me to call you Sally? Fine, Sally. Like, no big deal. I really don't care. Like, then we can move on. But
Gir, I'll have a little bit of a harder time with.
The what?
Like the Gir, kind of like.
I agree. I can't do that because that's just not English at that point.
Yeah.
I don't know how to speak that way. I'm sorry. I'm just not. It must be my cisgender whiteness. I'm just incapable of speaking that way.
Already canceled. But
I can't be canceled by them. That's the beauty of it. I can only be canceled by my own side. So it's a funny phenomenon.
But as soon as she said that, like a DEI task force leader who was actually a graduate student at Harvard she's at Harvard, by the way, starts organizing, pushback against her, and soon people aren't working her classes, and only a couple professors have their back. Friends disowned her just for saying biological sex is real. And
it's
she
like the
eventually,
J.K. Rowling story. I mean, it's like all the Harry Potter little shits. Thanks for ruining a good thing, guys. Everybody loves Harry Potter.
Yeah.
And then you go and ruin it with your activism and bashing J.K. Rowling because she has the audacity to say something extremely normal.
Yeah. Well, and meanwhile, I always make the point that and she eventually left Harvard. And I always make the point that's sad for Carol. It's also a loss for Harvard because Carol's brilliant. But what you're missing in a lot of these cases...
You're chipping away at this institution.
But also is that you're completely destroying people's trust and expertise because people aren't actually stupid. And they see that, like, wait a second, someone could get canceled as a professor from Harvard for saying biological sex is real?
That's nuts.
They're never going to believe you again on anything.
Right.
And that's what I think people are really missing. And meanwhile, like...
It's both sides' faults, right? Like it is the New York Times' fault.
Yeah.
Right? It's the news media's fault because they've done it. They've said too much crap that is untrue. The academics have done the same. So there's blame but it's also the individual's fault because you have to still be a thinking person. You don't just get to like outsource your brain activity. You have to be smart enough to say, I can tell the difference between what is real and what isn't. I'm like, look, not everything the New York Times puts out is a lie.
Sure.
Like, you have to be able to look through it and assess what is a lie. Mm-hmm. And you have to be able to look through your own stuff that you like to read and assess what is bullshit and what isn't.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're not doing that really scares the crap out of me. I get sent a lot of things like, damn, look at this, and I'm like, look, I can read this for 5 seconds and tell you it's bullshit.
Yeah.
Like there's certain cues that I can see. It's like they don't actually reference the a fact. They don't actually, there's I have to look at an example and we could go over it, but there are cues because I live this way. I do it all the time, so it's easy for me to spot the BS.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to teach everyone that, except to expose it as much as I can.
A good mental habit is that if you see a headline that it 100% represents your worldview and exactly the way you expect something should go, you should have a mental habit of being suspicious of that. Like when a study comes out that like exactly confers everything we said in coddling,
right?
And there've been a couple that actually really make strong arguments, from research. I'm like, I'm gonna have to read that backwards and forwards,
just to make sure I agree with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other, as I try to help people through that too, I'm like, look, is the argument being made? Do they at least acknowledge what the other side's argument is?
Yes.
In an honest way.
In an honest way.
And then confront it and dismantle it.
Yeah.
Because that's how you should do it. Because also, if you want to be persuasive, that's how you do it. I always try to honestly say, like, this is what they think.
Yeah.
This is why I think it's wrong. People trust me more if I do it that way. I also ask for examples, like if you're going to label someone, whether it's the right is labeling you a rhino or the left is labeling you a fascist, and you don't see a really solid example of like why they're making that claim, you should immediately dismiss whatever you're reading. Immediately dismiss it.
Yeah.
It's not good. It's not proper journalism. It's not an objective writer.
Yeah.
It's not fact-based. It's propaganda. But it's still up to you to figure out what the difference is. Like you can't be like, okay, well, all academics are liars, all doctors are liars because of the ivermectin thing. And it's like, well, but they're not all liars.
Yeah.
And you have to be smart enough to use common sense, just like you were on that case. Like maybe you were right not to believe them on that. I think the COVID history was very bad for public health experts.
Yeah. Well, we have a whole chapter actually on how much COVID did to undermine faith.
Horrible.
And it's one of these things where the lab leak theory. And I have to explain, like, do I know whether or not it came from a lab? No, I don't. But in March of 2020, people were acting like
it was crazy.
It was a completely crazy idea. And I was kind of like, okay, your certainty is the reason why people don't trust you.
Right.
Because
like,
everyone knows
you're not basing
no one
your
knows this.
Yeah, you're not basing your certainty on facts. And again, it's like when we dig into it, like you're not basing that assumption on anything.
Was there some massive study that China opened its doors to over the course of years, somehow magically in March of 2020?
Nope.
Of course there wasn't.
No.
But yeah, they were utterly sure that it couldn't possibly be true based on more or less nothing.
Yeah, and there's the backlash against trying and like maybe ivermectin works or doesn't work. I don't know, but I also know it's not that dangerous. Mm-hmm. So like, it wasn't worth the absurd reaction one way or the other. And yeah, people just lose trust. I mean, they do, or making young, healthy people take vaccines. Like I still have a problem with that. I would have never taken a vaccine if I hadn't had to travel to the UK.
The example we gave of the noble lie that really did not help the credibility of experts was early 2020 masking was ridiculous. That it doesn't stop the spread of diseases, and that essentially, like, you shouldn't wear a mask. Really, what they were trying to do at that point was save, but they were trying to say in the same voice somehow. It's like, but save it for emergency personnel. It's kind of like, okay, that seems a little bit like either it works or it doesn't.
Yeah.
But then it moved over to being like a holy, like something that was taken so seriously.
It became so weird.
And it's kind of
so weird.
And it's like. Yeah, so COVID.
Yeah, being in Texas was a lot better. Where do you live?
I live at Capitol Hill.
Okay.
I walked here, but we spend the summer in Maine.
Gotcha. Okay, so we can walk home together. Then I gotta go back to Texas. But Texas was much nicer to live in, and I would, obviously travel back and forth to DC a lot, and I'd be like, there's a person in a park by themselves wearing a mask. What in the absolute fuck is going on here? And I'm like, and this is in a Capitol Hill area. So, so the college-educated population here is probably like 95%.
Yeah.
What in the hell is going on here?
Well, as far as things that we did know pretty early on, and how much was how low transmission rates were outside, and living in DC, they shut down all the parks. Right away.
Yeah, the worst thing you could do.
And I had a
forcing people to congregate to go visit each other in their homes, which is what happened in New York too, I think.
Well, and at the time we had a 4 and a 2-year-old, so we could have actually. DC's like the easiest place in the world, given we have so many beautiful parks.
There's a ton of parks in Capitol Hill, and they're actually quite nice.
Oh, they're really nice. To keep 20 feet away from somebody if you want to, and they shut them all down. So that's actually how we ended up getting a place in Maine.
And you could argue. I mean, I don't know if we'll ever know in hindsight, but New York City is packed with big apartment buildings.
Yeah.
You force everyone to stay in a big apartment building that has the same air system.
Yeah.
Instead of letting them just be out.
Yeah.
What do you think's going to happen?
Yeah.
You know, there's so many mistakes made, and I don't know that the reckoning has really happened. But I also worry about the pendulum swinging too far, because what if there's a new pandemic that actually has different characteristics?
Yeah.
Actually does have a higher mortality rate. Actually does affect young people.
Yeah.
Different characteristics could be very scary, and now nobody trusts anything you're saying.
Yeah.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Now what?
Yep.
And this is. When people are like, lock Fauci up, and I'm like, look, I have no law that would like to accuse him of breaking, but do I think morally and ethically he's a bad dude? Yes, because he spoke in such absolutist terms and about things he knew he didn't know.
Yeah.
And that's unforgivable. I think it pushed us in some crazy directions.
Well, and that's one of the things we said in the end of that chapter. It's kind of like if people in power had simply leveled with the American public.
Just be like, we don't know this, we don't know that, you go make decisions.
Yeah, treat us like, I don't know, equal citizens.
Treat us like adults. It's like, and I say that in politics all the time, like from a policy perspective, we should treat the American people like we love them. And like, because treat
That's
them
a revolutionary act.
treat them like you would treat your kids.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you what though, like as I raise my daughter, if she gets a bad grade, I'm not going to tell her that it's some systemic reason that she got a bad grade and it's not her fault. No, it's like, you didn't study hard enough. You should have known better. Like, you got to do better next time. It's on you. That's what you tell someone if you love them.
Yeah.
Now, if you hate them, or just don't care about them, or just want their love, or you want their affection.
Everyone's against you.
Like the crazy aunt. So like your crazy aunt, she's never like, they're like, I just want you to like me. So, you know what? That teacher, she probably tried to trick you. I'm sure they didn't prepare you hard enough. Like, that's why you got a bad grade. This is happening because of somebody else.
Yeah.
You should get an allowance no matter how many chores you do. That's what you do to somebody if you don't want them to develop and to be a better person. If you love them, you do the opposite.
Well, that brings us back to like the whole people farther to the left being less happy. There's one really important concept in psychology called locus of control, and that if you have an internalized locus of control, that means you're in charge of your own destiny, and that's empowering, and people who have that tend to be happier.
Right.
If you have an externalized locus of control where you don't really have power of your own life, of course that's depressing. And like, how much of like the ideology currently like is fundamentally disempowering?
It's increasing, and it's what I've said before, right? How I divide voters on who I assess to be my supporters and who I wouldn't assess to be my supporters. It's that question.
Yeah.
Is the system rigged against you or not? Because that's an external locus of control
Exactly.
question. And I didn't come up with that. I was having a conversation with some people, and that was the question they posed as far as how they wanted to target voters.
Yeah.
I was like, fuck, that was brilliant.
Yeah.
Because that gets at it. It gets at it perfectly. Because there's plenty on the right who will answer that in the affirmative. Because again, that sort of populist movement, to me, populism is liberalism. It's the same thing. Because populism is telling you what you want to hear, and it's using emotional cues to get you to trust me.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, no, we're doing what the people want. I'm like, okay, well, is that what our founders wanted?
Yeah.
I tell you what, if I pull the idea of giving you $3,000 a month just from the government, I think it's going to get like a pretty high percentage. So that's popular. That's democracy. Is that right?
Yeah.
No. Like, well, I'm a conservative. You're supposed to rely on limiting principles.
Yeah.
And so I feel like we fight that on our own side, and I talk about it plenty on this podcast. But because I can't properly fight this craziness that I see on the left if my own team is starting to copy them.
Yeah.
It's not a good situation. We've got to get home and drop off my dog. But what else am I missing from your book that maybe last closing thoughts? This has been a really cool conversation.
Oh,
Really great
I'd
to
say
meet you.
some of the solution ideas, particularly for higher ed.
What are they?
In terms of fixing higher ed, I think that we really have to be thinking bigger than we're currently thinking. And I think the idea that, people are now saying that Columbia in future years is going to cost $95,000 a year with room and board is the sign of we're doing something wrong in the way we fund higher ed. because we've created an incentive essentially to nonstop bureaucratize, because that money is not going to more full-time faculty. That money is going to the increasingly large administrative bloat. And some of that comes from regulations coming out of the Department of Education that I've been fighting for my entire career. Like Harvard, I think, has like almost like 60 Title IX officers at this point.
It's insane.
It's just completely nuts. So, but I also think like something that would help a lot was a lot fewer jobs requiring a BA is not a bad place to start.
Requiring a what?
A bachelor's degree.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, but that's on I don't know how to legislate that. That's on employers. And I think
I'm not necessarily saying this all has to come down, but I mean, like that's employers saying, like, I mean, we actually.
I think it's happening to an extent.
It is.
It depends on the industry.
Oh, totally. And I want more ways that you can show how smart and hardworking you are that don't involve spending, ridiculous sums of money.
I would agree. I mean, like all my staff, especially my legislative staff here, I don't think anyone has my education, Tufts and Harvard and all that. But they would run circles from a policy perspective around a lot of the professors, everybody who teaches policy at Harvard. Now, look, you're teaching different now. At a school, you're teaching theory and it's different. But like when I got to Congress, because I got to Congress basically right after going to the Kennedy School, and I mean, these people up here in their mid-20s who understand legislation and how to write it, and it's like, it's so far advanced from what you're actually learning in the classroom at these places.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I'm not even sure I'd hire, like I would definitely not hire you based on your experience, based on your master's degree.
Yeah.
There's zero chance you're getting hired in this office because of that. You're getting hired here because of your legislative experience on the Hill. It's also why, like, even I couldn't get hired here. Mm-hmm. I mean, so I had to run for Congress. Mm-hmm. But because you kind of have to start at the bottom. You gotta understand how the nuts and bolts of how it functions, and a degree just doesn't really do much for that. Now it does things for writing and critical thinking. I'm not saying we shouldn't have that for this particular job, but God, there's so many jobs that why not a 6-month certificate? Why not send your kids to get a 6-month certificate, be a pipe welder for a while, go to college when they're 24, and like actually have a brain, and I learned I loved going back to school in my early 30s. Because I just dove into the academics better, and it was more fun that way.
By the time I went to college, I was already a cook, and as far as like an empowering kind of experience, the idea that I can drop out anytime, make a good living as a cook, like that really was something I kind of felt like I personally needed. But also, probably too much childhood independence, to be honest about that. But yeah, like as far as like
I was working since age 4. My parents told me it was normal.
I started working at a restaurant when I was 11, actually.
Close. I was close.
And it's one of those things where people are kind of like, how did someone allow that? I'm like, nobody allowed it. I was tall. People
I was tall. They thought I was older. So that's how child labor laws were created. All right, Greg. Well, thanks so much for being on.
Absolutely.
And since you're in Capitol Hill, we should do this more often, and we can kind of hit random issues. It'd be great.
No, agreed. Absolutely.
Appreciate it.